Niemen Hao. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. All right, here we are back in the global topic of innovating, learning, and teaching. All right, these were the first 7 segments. These are the ones that are coming next, just to tune you in where we were and where we are. So we covered the first 5 segments, a broad overview of what I'm trying to do, and then moving into a critique of the 21st century teaching and learning situation, also the problems within institutions find themselves that market, to a degree, learning and teaching. And so I tried to develop a couple of new objectives, ways of getting out of the crisis. And then I turned in the 4th segment to the issue of identity. Yeah, who are these learners in the 21st century? And what are these institutions? And what is the role of the teacher or teaching in all this? And then in the last segment, segment 5, I turned to the idea, I tried to make you familiar with the idea that we should shift maybe from the what that we are learning, the content, not we are doing away with this, not that we don't want to learn anything. No, no, no. Content still will be there. What we learn is still important. But in order to get out of the crisis of where we are with learning and teaching in a larger framework, I suggested to turn to the processes of learning and the process of teaching. So this is no simple fix, so that we produce smart teachers and they know what they do, and then we have better learners, motivated learners, global learners. It's not that easy. And I don't think that we should focus on the teacher or the teaching, but rather on the learning. So with the first 5 segments, there was also a shift from teaching to learning. What is learning? How does learning take place? And how can we move into a different form of learning? So this is where we are now. And that's where we want to turn to the 2 segments today, segment 6. That's where I will try to show a couple of these processes and work with these processes, and then turn to qualitative. That's my key course, that's my signature course, I want to say, that I teach, and that's where I want to relate the content of what I teach or what people teach when they teach qualitative to the kind of innovative work with the learning processes. All right? So let's start with segment 6, innovating the process, focusing on the process, right? As contrasting on the what, the content of the learning. Yeah? Usually we are more concerned with how can we be more efficient with what we are teaching and what the students are supposed to learn. And we focus on that. And here is this shift on learning, but from the learner's identity perspective, that we want to transform, that we want to work with. Okay. So what we had suggested already was that an identity shift is necessary in the learner, but also with that will go along an identity change in the teacher and in the role of the institution. And I went through the topic of identity. Yeah, who are we as learners in the 21st century? Who are we as teachers or instructors? That role is changing. And the role of the institution, the identity of these institutions, in particular higher education institutions, is also radically changing. Yeah, so this is where we started. And here are, I think, 8 processes that I will focus on in more detail. And I'm just giving you the first 4 here and then go through the next 4 very briefly, and then we dig a little bit deeper into these 8. So the first one is simply we read. Yeah? When we learn, we typically, nowadays, we read. What do we do when we read, and how can we make this reading process deeper, more productive? Okay. The second one is focusing on the learning objective of collaboration. Yeah? In the 21st century, we have to become better in collaborating, that is, working with our differences, because those differences are good. So working in small groups. Some people call this teamwork, but that's a simplification in my opinion. Yeah? And this is where I am trying to introduce a concept of working with peers, but some peers that are a little bit more experienced. Yeah? And they guide the learner through the learning process. The third one is the portfolio method. And I will elaborate on that a little bit. What is the portfolio and what is it good for? Yeah, portfolios are typically folders, sometimes electronic folders, that we can send out when we go and apply for jobs. Yeah, so that our potential employer can look at the portfolio. They can't invite us personally all the time, but look at the portfolio. It's a show and tell. Then the fourth one is I use portfolio checks as a method, as a process, checking on and guiding through the emergence of a portfolio. Okay? And with the fifth aspect of these processes, I would like to focus much stronger than I used to do on spelling out and working with the learning objectives with our students. Yeah, so that the students from the very start know where we are trying to go, what this course or particular course is about, what the general learning goals are, the overall learning goals that we basically focused on in the first couple of segments, and then also, of course, what the content is of the course that we are trying to bring closer to our population, to our students. The seventh one is project work. Increasingly working with and involving our learners in projects. At the beginning, small projects. These projects become more and more relevant, and they become, so to speak, signature work. Something that our students, the learner, is identifying with, is owning, yeah, and is making their own, and ultimately also able to show and tell. And last but not least, the classes are still important. Yeah? The instructors and the peer learning assistants are still conducting classes. What do we do in the 21st century in these classes? Yeah? I don't think we will, in 5 years, there will be any more lectures. What I'm doing right now, lecturing, is gone. We are done with this. And what we do much more, this is my prediction at least, is we engage also as instructors in showing and telling, in having small projects in the classroom that we can use in order to engage our students and also show our own engagement. So what we do in the classroom also is changing. Okay? These are the 8 segments, 8 small segments that I want to work through in segment 6 today. So let's start with providing our students with reading material. I mean, first of all, why do we want them to read? Reading is a form of collaboration. Yeah? Usually with other people who are not here, who are out there, some of them in literature, at least they are dead, but we collaborate with them. Yeah, we read what they were up to, where their mindset was, where they were coming from. So this is something that we do in assigning readings. Now, typically in larger courses in particular, people use textbooks. I've done that. And I'm very, very frustrated with textbooks. Yeah, because textbooks try to even out, try to smooth, make things coherent, where there sometimes is no coherence, where there are contradictions. So why do we keep the contradictions and the problems away from our students? This is where I started early, moving away from using textbooks, in particular those textbooks where there are these little corners where the student says, this is what I need to learn in order to be able to perform well on the quizzes. Yeah, it is not the kinds of things that we want our students in order to become critical and engaged. So I'm using articles and chapters, and I put them together. Now that's also work, but it is interesting work because that's where I have the student's mind as an instructor in my mind. Yeah, so I'm working with what I think these particular articles do in terms of connecting them with these different articles, but also moving them into a particular direction. And there are a lot of papers and articles that I use typically where there are contradictions. And students sometimes say, well, what am I supposed to believe here? So-and-so says this, and so says that. But that's, again, to bring them into the game, to get them engaged. It's their choice here to make an informed answer, to have an informed answer. Yeah. All right. But what we want to do with these readings in particular is deeper reading. In the last 10, 15, 20 years, students are reading less and less for the classes. Of course, I'm not speaking about you. You're reading everything that needs to be read. But typically, yeah, when a learner, myself involved, is looking at an article that I'm supposed to read, I glance at it. I usually start at the end, who is quoted, that gives me an idea. I read the abstract, of course, and this is how I work through it, yeah, superficially, most of the time. And that's ultimately not enough. Yeah? If we train our students to do a fast reading, then they will never become engaged. So we need to do something in order to give them fewer readings. That's what I learned very quickly. But engage them in some deeper reading. So what I do is, these articles that I give, even for beginners, articles and chapters, are not easy, they are not simple. But I develop a couple of guiding questions so that the students know, first of all, what is relevant, and they look out, they have to read in order to answer these guiding questions, these study questions, so they know kind of in what direction these questions are taking them. But in addition, these are also often questions where the learner is required to connect to previous readings or to some certain aspects outside the classroom. Okay? So the study questions have a very important function for the learner and then also for the ultimate process that the whole course will take us. And then what we do is we take one of these study questions and quiz our learners at the beginning of the next class when the reading is due. So there's no surprise. Yeah? So these questions are not anything that you can learn. You have to get engaged in order to answer these questions, to work with these questions. Yeah? And so then one of these questions is becoming a quiz question. In addition, and these are the kinds of scaffolds that we need to build, we give the learners the opportunity to discuss these questions with one another. Yeah? This is not cheating. This is a way of cooperating, collaborating, and I'll get more into this. They will do this in their small groups, but they also can do it on Moodle or QQ, on Blackboard, yeah, whatever the institution has, so that the students can post answers and get feedback from a small group of others. And then at the end, exemplary answers from the quiz, they will be posted again on Moodle, QQ, or wherever it is. So this is a way, a process of dealing with readings. Yeah? Different from taking a textbook and assigning it, and then in the middle of the semester or by the end of the semester have a cumulative array of questions, yeah, most likely multiple choice questions, where the students are quizzed at that point. Okay? So let me shift to, the second aspect of the process. Work in small groups, engaging in collaboration. Now this is done with a peer learning assistant, somebody who already was in this class and would like to get some extra credit, becoming a peer assistant and guiding the students through the course. Yeah. So they come to the class and they conduct once or twice, and sometimes the students, the learners, are asking for even more meetings of groups of 4 to 6 students who sometimes also are meeting during my class time. Yeah, I give the class time because what is happening in these small groups in terms of discussing the material is potentially a lot more important and a lot more productive than me telling them, yeah, the instructor telling them or taking them through this. Yeah, we'll get there too. But the main focus here is on collaboration, so that the students talk with one another and realize their strengths and also their weaknesses. And there's nothing wrong with being weak in certain situations, yeah, because that's how we get better. If we only experience ourselves as strong in particular skills, we feel we have nothing to build on, to add on. So this is a very important process, and this works much better than when the teacher is telling a learner, look, that was bad work, or that's where you were weak. Yeah? But rather as peers learning with one another, guided by another peer who is a little bit more experienced, is a way of collaborating and learning in a much more productive way. And some actual research of a friend, colleague of mine, who has tested those classes that use peer learning assistants and those that do not, fare a lot better. Those classes that do. Okay? So, the third aspect, the portfolio. Now, I already mentioned, the portfolio is a very, I think, relevant and important new way of better engaging our learners, but also helping our learners to self-reflect, to self-assess. So in this, the portfolio is nothing, it's a nice word, but it's a folder in which all the work that has been done, like handouts, like class notes, maybe even a newspaper article that the learner comes across, feeds into. Okay? It's a folder that is growing over the course, and then at the end, it can be used for what people call a formative purpose. That is, I can look back at my own folder and say, what did I do at the beginning? Where was I? Yeah, if I don't have this reminder, I think, oh, I did wonderfully. But if I look back at the very beginning, so, oh my God, where was I? Sometimes I'm surprised. I may have been right on target. But usually there's a process of learning, yeah, of change. And it is so important to see and realize this change, and for the future also realize how I can work with this kind of change. So this is what is called the formative purpose of a portfolio, as an assessment tool also. And then it is for evaluative or assessment purposes for the teacher, the instructor, and the institution. The instructor can look at it and say, yeah, you've come a long way, and look where you started. Yeah, and some students start at a much different level from other students. And they may progress in different ways, but they all progress significantly. So in my grading, yeah, that's what I can take into account. If I only have tests in the middle of the semester and at the end, then I'm not paying particular attention to where those students started. And I think it's only fair to realize that students start at different levels and also have different contributions potentially and different potential with something that they show in their portfolio. Okay? So it's a much finer, more efficient way to get into the students' actual engagement. And remember, that was what Sir Robinson argued. We have to, what he called, personalize our teaching. But I think this is a way of learning that is personalized in a way that becomes more productive. All right, so let's move on to the fourth, and this is not unimportant, portfolio checks. At the very beginning, the learners always are afraid of having their portfolio checked. First by the peer learning assistants, and also in the group, sharing their portfolio. And then increasingly by the instructor, who would like to know what's happening. And that again, this is where the peer learning assistants are helping the instructor also and say, well, look, one particular student in my group has some problems at home and he or she couldn't come to a lot of meetings, and how can we help? All right, so these are a couple of examples. But the portfolio checks, this is where we ask the learners to write 2 to 3 pages for the check time, and these are 5 or 6 checking points in the semester, to write a report, a self-assessment. Yeah? How am I doing? Where am I? What do I find confusing? What do I find particularly interesting? Yeah? And this is where we feed the learners with the learning objectives, yeah, so that they have also something that they can look at and continuously compare themselves. How am I doing? If these are the learning objectives, yeah, what is actually my progress? I always also let my students pick one of their learning objectives that is their own, and they can work on this over the semester. For instance, there are students then who say, well, you know, I'm particularly shy, I never say anything in class, and I want to work on that. And then I read this, and the peer learning assistant as well. So we say, okay, now let's see, how can we help you? Yeah? And this is something then that the student can monitor with the portfolio over time, and at the end say, yeah, there is something that I now can do that I didn't do before. Yeah? So also feeling more secure, feeling better about what they're doing with this focus. Okay? So this is where these portfolio checks are relevant. And they sum up, yeah, they cumulatively, at the very end, lead to some overall final assessment where the student takes more time and more space in order to reflect and assess what have they accomplished by the end of the semester in this particular course. And that's where also content and also the projects that I will go with next will come up. Back to the learning objectives. And it is really, really important, and this only occurred to me over the last 5 years or so. Before that, I always thought, okay, I know what the learning goals and the learning objectives in my classes are. But then when I was forced to write them down, I said, yeah, this is possibly a little bit more complex than I had thought. And in particular, then with the work that I mentioned in the very first segment a couple of years ago as part of a task force that was looking at the curriculum and saying, what are we doing as an institution in terms of taking our students into the 21st century? So this is where the learning objectives become relevant. And I distinguish between 2 kinds. The first ones are the ones that I went over in 2 segments ago. I think that was segment 4, segment 3. And then there are the more particular learning objectives, the learning goals of the kind of course that you are teaching. If you're teaching a course on literature in the early modern period, you want to introduce students into the historical aspects and the particular writers, etc. If you are teaching a course on morphology, yeah, then that is more relevant. So you will try to bring those learning goals to the fore right at the beginning in the syllabus that you hand out. The learning goals have to be spelled out there. And then what you need to do, what I need to do, what we need to do, is we have to work through those learning goals so that the students also understand these learning goals. And then in the course, repeatedly, we have to remind them. And we have to work with our peer learning assistants also so that they can break the learning goals continuously to the learners and remind them that these are the objectives. This is where we are headed toward the end of the semester. Okay, so spelling them out in the syllabus at the very beginning, discussing them repeatedly, in particular, I think, in the peer learning groups where the students can also discuss their understanding of these objectives. And then, very important point, where the learner begins to realize that they have to show, they have to make these learning goals relevant in their self-assessments and in their project work. Yeah? So this is something that will come up. Wait, am I moving forward? Did I already go through the collaboration in small groups? I thought I did.
Yes.
Thank you. Just wanted to see whether you all right. So we went through this, but now the project work. Working on projects. Yeah. Getting out of theory and bombarding our learners with a theoretical background. It's not irrelevant, but they can acquire the theoretical background much better if they are engaged in doing something, working through something within a small group, but then also owning a project. And I will show in the segment number 8 a little bit of a project, and then later on also a project in which these kinds of skills become a little bit clearer. So engaging in a project, working through a project, small one first and then a larger one second, so that the students have the opportunity to practice, and then asking them to present in a group, yeah, as a group. Not that one of them is the speaker and tells us what they did, but rather that they take on different aspects and present these different aspects. And at the end of each project, but in particular of the larger project in a course, this is where the learner reflects and tries to integrate the readings, the class exercises, into what they took away from engaging in this project. So this is where project work is made relevant in and through the classroom and distributed over a particular time, so that the learner has also the opportunity to again discuss this with other peers, to discuss this also with a peer learning assistant who has had this experience of working through these projects, and then also at the very end to proudly, if you want to, present and say, look, this is what I have accomplished. So they can show something and tell and document what they have learned, rather than just saying, oh, I've learned so much more and I'm so smart now, but documenting it with the type of work that the learner has engaged in is the best exemplar that there can be. And at that point, when the portfolio is complete, that's where it is presented to the teacher, and the teacher, the instructor, can also use this and tell the institution, say, look at the good work that my students are doing, the kinds of project work. And the student also can take parts out and work on a larger portfolio. This is what I learned in this particular course, this in that course, this in that course, and then present this to, at the end, as an exam, together with possibly an oral examination, or present this to employers and say, look, these are the kinds of things that I am qualified, and also this is the kind of engagement that I can show, rather than just grades or qualifications. So if you show an engagement at a particular level, I think you're much better evaluated, not only by your instructors or the institution, but also later by others. So what is possible here at the end, after the project is done, is to integrate everything that the learner has come across, and make it a whole, make it a coherent whole from the learner's perspective. Okay. And it's not just for the institution or to get a good grade. It's also that the learner, something that the learner identifies with, that the learner wants to, for his or her own ego, do well. So last but not least, the classes. Now, where are we now with the instructor and the so-called contact hours, where students and instructor meet? As I already mentioned, in a little while, what we are doing, what I'm doing right now, speaking and you listening and taking notes, will be over. There will be no more. There will still be these kinds of small talks, short talks, where a presenter is presenting a particular point of view. But that has to be complemented with a lot of discussion. And we will have still a little bit of discussion left in a couple of minutes. All right, the class is not gone. And my intention is to use, or my preference, is to use the class for exercises, to demonstrate also interactively. And I will try to do this in segment 7, a little bit at least. We don't have all that time. But to pose a problem, and then say, so how can we work with this particular problem as a group, but then trying to show, because the instructor, that's why the instructors are paid, I guess, are supposed to be at least some kinds of experts, and not just in breaking the information so that students can learn the information, but rather also from their research in a way so that they can show and tell and clarify, point up particular things that the untrained eye wouldn't see. So that's what the classes, in my opinion, are really very good for, and they should be used for those purposes, to exemplify, to demonstrate, to do a little work, and, if possible, to use this interactively. And also, this came up last time, I think instructors increasingly are forced to introduce media. Reading doesn't go away, but we work more and more with visual data in all disciplines, interestingly. So bringing that in, and in addition, our learners are so well informed in working with visual media. They can make little movies, my students, they can do things that I only can dream of. So bringing that in, or trying at least, and handing that over to our learners, I think we have a lot to contribute. So these are all the 8 process aspects that I wanted to quickly work through. There's a lot more to say here, and I hope I didn't forget anything. So that concludes segment 6, and with that we have a couple of minutes for questions, discussions, whatever it is that comes to your mind.